Mark Crowley and I began doing this YouTube series that we dubbed The Shoot, that actually comes from professional wrestling, where that's a real one they call it a shoot. The rest of it they call it a work. And the show has been incredibly successful. 10 days ago, 12 days ago, I get sent a book entitled We Stormed the Capitol, an eyewitness account of January the 6th. To me, January the 6th is one of the worst moments in American history. We'll talk about my views, but the views of the guests are better. Welcome to the show. We're sitting there talking before we get off. Is Ben Hamilton. Ben, thanks, man, and welcome to the shoot.
Thanks very much for having me.
Your background, so people know something about you, and then why? Why were you there on that day?
Sure. Those actually are two questions that combine for one answer pretty easily. I kind of brand myself as a history teacher who's finally snapped, or sometimes I call myself a crazed history teacher adventurer. So I was a high school history teacher. I have degrees in political science, master's degree in education, that sort of thing. Big fan of the Roman Republic and American Revolution. And round about the middle of the COVID lockdown, I wasn't working anyway, and I could not shake this feeling that what was happening in my civilization looked a lot like other civilizations I used to teach about when they were in the process of collapsing. In particular, I always go back to this Roman Republic metaphor, not the empire, the Republic, when any semblance of democracy and order fell apart. So I decided to take one last shot at my dream from when I was a teenager of being an author, being, almost sort of like a Jack Kerouac style author, or John Reed is really my inspiration, although not many people who aren't history teachers know who John Reed is.
We talking about the John Reed who went to the conception of the Soviet Union?
Yes.
Okay.
Not only that, but the Mexican Revolution. He managed to be in the middle and wrote two amazing books in which he got to know the leaders, interviewed personally, some of the leaders of the Mexican Revolution and the Soviet Revolution. So he's this primary source document, something a term history teachers love, people who actually witness history. And then he wrote these amazing books that are actually fun to read. Like you can give those to 17-year-olds and they're exciting. There's like in each book, people almost kill him. Like there's this period in the Mexican Revolution where they like line him up against the wall and they're about to shoot him, and he just talks his way out of it. It's exciting, but it's also legit history books.
Oh yeah, and he was I think buried in the Kremlin wall. I mean,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Reed was, Reds, right? But in that time period,
yes,
John Reed is significant in that time period.
And another parallel to our time period, he died tragically from the pandemic of his age, the Spanish flu. So we'll never know if he would have denounced what he saw happen to the Soviets later. But so people like that were my hero. So I set out to try and witness history as best I could. That was the birth of the Chasing History Project. This idea that I think I'm going to try and do these interesting things that would make good books. And I'm going to make my target audience not the people alive now. My target audience is some 17-year-old kid forced to sit in a history class 50, 100 years from now. And they're assigned this book, and it's actually fun to read. And so I started out, actually, my first project was that big protest thing in Seattle where the protesters took over a significant chunk of the city. They called it the Chaz and changed the name to the Chop. I wrote a full manuscript for that. But rather than editing that, I had this feeling that I really wanted to see what played out in the election. So I put that book aside, and I started kind of following Trump rallies in a van. I was like a concert groupie, and I just interviewed people at every rally, thinking I could cut the interviews together. And I went to some other things to try and get a broader sense of the time period. So I went to BLM rallies. I snuck past the police line at a Biden rally. I really probably shouldn't have done that. Like, there were people with dogs and guns saying, "What the hell are you doing here?" So I gathered all this material just for a generalized book. But one of those days in which I was already interviewing people at the start of the day was January 6th. And so,
How did you know to how did you know to go there?
well, like I said, I'd just been following Trump public speaking events for several months at this point. I was like a concert groupie, so it was just another day to me. Like I had a sense that there was tension
Yeah,
building, sure.
yeah.
I had a sense that maybe something really interesting is going to happen one of these days, but a lot of my guesses didn't come true. Like I'd originally thought maybe something crazy would happen on election night, and not much happened then. You know,
But inside the White House, there was a lot going on.
yes.
I mean, that's the beginnings of the end of what happens to Fox. But that's the turmoil that's in there and the lies that have already begun have begun on election night.
Definitely.
So,
And my goal was to, like, you never know quite what's going to happen in history, but it's a lot of what I do is gambling. I try to guess when something interesting will happen. And, I have trips where I go out on where I don't catch anything. That's why I call it the Chasing History Project. It's very difficult to catch history, but I chase after it. But on January 6th,
where did you go that you came up with nothing?
I had this idea that maybe there might be some sort of explosion of tension on in the Philadelphia in the
Huh.
midterm elections, because see, I was in Philadelphia during this time period when I was just driving all up and down the East Coast after the presidential elections, and it looked like there maybe might be a riot brewing at a couple of points when I was there. Uh,
Pro or anti-Trump riots?
Well, there were kind of people separated on two sides with the police trying to keep them separate.
Oh,
I'd
yeah.
say the Trump side was bigger. And then, this is one of these many. This is nice that you asked me because there's all these things that I gathered material on that I never got to use. But there was this heroic drum corps, like a group of 5 or 6 people who just played the drums, who showed up with the knowledge that, hey, this might turn into a riot or some sort of violence, and they turned it into a dance party instead. Like they did that on purpose. They showed up to hit the drums, and then they had like a routine. They had trying to say they were trying to do good in their community. They had a little speech. But that was a couple of years. That was during this time when tensions were so high, when Trump was saying the election was stolen. So I came back 2 years later because I thought, you've got a candidate who literally, has brain damage. I'm sorry, but you watch him give speeches. I thought maybe they'd be so mad that something would happen there, but nothing really did. And in fact, once I got there, I just started obsessively checking the news, and I was like, oh, I'll bet the interesting thing is going to be the recount in Arizona. And like I was on the website to buy the ticket to go there, and I was like, I'm out of money, But something more interesting happened there, and I bet had I been on the ground, I could have interrogated people. Oh, another one actually, since you've gone in this direction, was another thing this did happen. I just didn't quite make it to the top of my list. I'm hoping to make some podcasts about it fairly soon. Is I went to the Georgia State House when they were
Took the vote.
when they were electing their electors, when because I had some tips, from people I was in communication with back then, that there was some really interesting characters. I'm usually looking at the people on the ground who had looked like they were two mobs who might break into violence with each other, but I ended up going inside the building, and I was stopped by security at first because I didn't have a proper press pass, but they said, here's the room that the public people can watch the events on TV in. And then all the reporters who were in there, like, they started saying, hey, something crazy is going on downstairs. And I just kind of managed to slip in with them. And I interviewed and met some of the Trump slate of electors as they left the room, which is very important now.
And that's part of I've called it a RICO indictment, but that's what's taking place in Georgia now.
It is.
And these guys are surrendering quite well. Tomorrow night, as we do this show, tomorrow, Thursday, Donald Trump's supposed to walk in and get booked.
Yeah. And that's and again, like, this is the kinds of things that, like, a lot of people, most normal people, maybe have no particular context for this. This is like, oh, this is weird. But I look at this and I'm like, this really looks like some Julius Caesar, Cato kind of stuff to me. This is the almost, it's scary, the times we live in. But it's like the whole, there's
what I say is, when I hear people use the term coup, the military's not involved in this. This is a putsch, and an attempted putsch that Donald Trump fermented, along with people like John Eastman, Jenna Ellis. I mean, I can give you the list: Lynn Wood, the Kraken, social media, AM talk radio.
What do you think of Sidney Powell?
Oh,
what do you think Sidney Powell fits into this?
I don't have dealings with Sidney Powell, but Jenna Ellis is a homegrown Denver girl. And if Jenna Ellis lost 3 more IQ points, you'd have to water Jenna minimum of once a week. But she got caught up in this stuff and started drinking the Kool-Aid. Lynn Wood used to threaten me. I did the Ramsey case, and he was a lawyer for the Ramseys, and I wish I'd have kept the voicemail, the threats that he would. I mean, I get once a week, twice a week.
Wow.
And then what he did, he just threw his credentials in, said, But the rest of them, John Eastman hung up on me, and caused me all kinds of problems from Trumpists who attacked me and then my family. So
wow,
I got a dog in the fight, and I watched Eastman walk out of there yesterday and say it was still stolen, which was just unbelievable. Eastman's got problems everywhere. When Donald Trump walks in there, do you think he comes out a hero tomorrow?
Oh, well, let me. I mean, let me definitely quickly answer that, but then I feel like I'm straying a little bit outside of my area of expertise at this point. So just being a guy interested in society, who's been following politics all my life and stuff like that. Yeah, I think he's very good at playing to the crowd, playing to public opinion. I think he understands how to manage public opinion, and particularly he understands the difference between the people who do support him and the people who never will. And he only troubles himself with the ones he can get. And I think, just going back to being a reality TV show, he's had that skill set. I think he's consistently run circles around anyone who might call themselves his enemy. That's my read on him. But if it's all right with you, I do feel that I'm maybe being a little unfair, because I think what I can speak with some level of authority on is the conditions on the ground on January 6th. I was there interviewing people before, during, and after it happened. And I do think that there are a lot of media narratives that very much mislead at least what was happening on the ground that way, spin it to their own purposes each day. So I try to cast myself, difficult as it may be in this time period, as someone who's just seeking the truth, seeking accuracy, rather than being part of one team or another. So I do try to be as fair as I can to the Trump people, although they hate me anyway. I do try to be as critical as I think is fair to the Democrats and the left, and they hate me anyway. And that's honestly how I feel like I know I'm doing a good job. If only one side hated me, then I would worry I was biased. But everybody hates me, so that tells me I must be doing something good. So I had been conducting interviews with Trump supporters for several months, and I continued doing so on January 6th. And it wasn't, I stayed to watch Trump's speech. A lot of people left early, and that turned out to be very important.
The speech he gave that January 6th.
Yes, yes.
And well, Eastman's standing there, Giuliani's standing there,
I
Donald
believe
Trump.
so.
Yeah, Trump's
And
the he's the act in the end.
oh, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think in in some ways I think that's really the main motivation for him. I think he just kind of likes being a rock star. But again, I'm straying into speculation. What I can say for sure is I didn't see any like call. He didn't stand up and say, "Now go commit violence to overthrow the
Oh,
government." A lot of
no,
people think that happened. That did not happen.
no, I
He did
agree.
some other things, but it wasn't until what became the title of my book, which is someone said, "Oh yeah, sorry guys, we stormed the Capitol." And I actually think that's important that the begin the sorry guys. I put that in there because it gets like the surreal casualness of it. Like when
Mhm.
I was in the middle, like while this was going on, like one of the things I did was I bought a hot dog. Like it there were definitely bits of violence. Like I think like the Tucker Carlson had that story where he was like, "Oh, nothing really happened," and
Yes,
he
it did.
right, and
Yes,
well, he cut together moments
yeah,
that happened in
right,
which it was calm, but there were also pockets of violence.
sure.
But do you mind if I just kind of give you my breakdown of what I think
No,
happened that day? So I did, in hindsight, I look over the interviews I conducted, and there were some people who were saying things to me like, "We need to push our way into the Capitol building." This is before it happened, and saying I had this weird thing I heard from a few different sources saying like, "This is what our founding fathers did."
no,
They go into the building and they relieve the government of their power with no shots fired.
no,
And I
no,
kind of went off on those people. Like, what are you talking
no,
about? The
no.
Revolutionary War was long and violent. But the
Yeah,
point is, there was some level of foresight, some idea that getting into the building was a goal. At the time, I thought those people were crazy. But in hindsight, I look back and they did say that, and then they did it. So, like in that sense, they weren't totally crazy to think it was possible because I didn't think it was possible. But so,
but were they sent to do it? I mean, Ben.
yeah. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's what I think happened. Like just based on talking to the people in the crowd and beforehand, there was a sense that okay, the big thing is when the Congress votes to officially certify the election, and we Trump supporters, not me, but this is what they're thinking. We have to stop that somehow. And I think the belief was that once they got there, Trump would tell them the plan. So I think, I mean, there's definitely an undeniable level of foresight there. Like I talked to a lot of people who had, for example, flags mounted on clubs, like
Hmm.
very thick poles,
Oh,
way thicker than a flagpole needs to be. But like it was sort of, I guess, maybe to their mind, plausibly, just a
yeah.
flag. And a lot of people showed up wearing body armor. They brought
Oh, yeah.
gas masks, And I
Stun
had
guns.
this, right. Well,
Yeah.
I did not see any stun guns. I saw pepper spray. I cannot personally verify that there were stun
Right.
guns, but I did. I did not see any actual firearms. Like I
No.
cannot confirm that. I don't really think that there were any being
Well,
openly
that's
brandished.
Washington D.C. You could have not walked around with a 45 in your
Right.
in your vest, but they did. They had everything else
Right.
up to
Right.
I mean, they're showing up with intent.
Well, yeah, but okay. So it's what I. One of the things I said is, well, let me because I think the timeline is important. I
Mm.
think the timeline is important. One of the key things is Trump talks too long. He talks way longer than he's supposed to. He's over an hour, and I was taking notes while he was talking because I thought that would be the historically significant thing. And he did say some very questionable things that like I would have assumed there were laws against. He didn't say go commit violence, but he did
Well,
keep giving very specific numbers,
yes.
saying there were 82,673 dead people who voted in Michigan. There were, and then like
Yeah.
he went on like that for over an hour.
And none of
And
it's true.
yeah, he never listed any sources. I have never
No.
heard anyone put forth
No.
any plausible theory for what
No.
those sources were. And so I kind of would have assumed there was some sort of law against that. If there's not, there should be. Claiming an election is stolen without even providing evidence. But the thing is, he gets carried away by the sound of his own voice. And the crowd starts getting restless, and which I'd never seen happen before.
They began leaving before he was done speaking.
Exactly, because word starts going around the crowd that, hey, the certification is starting. That thing that we were supposed to stop, it's happening without us. Right. And so they leave without him. And he had said, when I finish speaking, we are going to march to the Capitol. And in the spirit of accuracy, he said, we peacefully and patriotically march. He keeps pointing that out. He did say that, but he was the president of the United States, someone these people trust implicitly, and he was giving these very specific numbers about the election being stolen. And so they believed him. So they were kind of worked up in a bit of, an emotional state. So the people who left early, who left without him, had no supervision. There was no one leading that march. And one thing I noticed, like being there, because I've been in political marches. I've been to like the Iraq War, anti-war protest on those same streets in that same city. There was no like porta potties. There was no setup to indicate that there was a march planned. He just told a big group of people to gather together, and then told them to march across town when he was done speaking. And then he spoke way longer than he should have, and they left without him. And so there was no supervision. And so there was really no one to stop them. There was no one with like a clipboard and a bullhorn saying, okay, this is where our permit says we're supposed to march. It wasn't really a march. I try to be very careful in terms of like accusations. I try not to say things I can't back up. But I think it would be fair to call them an angry mob at that point. Oh. I think you could, like, I fall short of insurrection. I fall short of coup. I'm not quite sure I buy that. But I definitely think you could say this is an angry mob walking across the Capitol. And the people I tragically did not see the beginning of violence. I would love to have been able to do that. But what I did do was I interviewed people for over like a month afterwards, anyone who said they was there. And the image I've put together of what happened is that the people a few rows back were egging on the people in the very front. So somebody in, a few rows back shouted, break down the barrier. And then the guy in the front did it, and then like the police are standing there, and like the police are under explicit orders not to open fire on the crowd. And the police are badly undermanned because the mayor of D.C., in her wisdom, published a letter saying she did not want National Guard reinforcements. And I think that's a major turning point that's often overlooked. I think had just the DC taken this a little more seriously, put up like a fence that was a little more sturdy, taken those reinforcements, I don't think anyone would have gotten in. Because, I mean, I talked to a lot of people, and yes, there was some level of foresight, but I also found a lot of them kind of pathetic. Like, it's kind of weird to me. It's kind of embarrassing. It's embarrassing that this group of people who were so confused and ill-informed that they thought just getting into the room made them accomplish their goals were able to overpower the Capitol and chase Congress out of the building.
Ben, they were taught that.
Yes,
but the warm-up act of John Eastman or the different people that stood and they were the opening acts for Donald Trump, they're telling these folks that in there, it's all, Eastman, who I had an experience with, comes up with this idea, and they can't sell it to Pence, and to me, Pence becomes a hero. They can't sell it to Pence. They can't talk Pence into stopping the count, and so they were going to stop the count. But when you build a gallows out there and all the different things that happened, nobody gets to walk away from this. And although they're certainly attempting to, they fermented a putsch. That was if Donald Trump had not called these people to D.C. and then fired them up, it wouldn't have happened. I try, because I mean,
one of the sad truths I deal with is I don't really trust the media anymore. I catch lies on both
Yeah.
sides.
Oh,
I
yeah.
document a few in my book of,
Oh.
for example, and I take no credit for this, but there's a Glenn Greenwald reported, and I just parroted it, that there was this widespread media story that the mob beat a police officer over the head with a fire extinguisher, and he slipped into a coma and died. And that's totally made up. There was one guy who died of a stroke the next day, but he went home. He was awake. He called his wife and said he was fine. There was never any sign that he was hit with anything. That was a completely made up story. And yet that guy's body was lay in the state, and members of Congress were supposed to walk past it and told that lie. So I had to be super careful. I wish I didn't, but even the people who, on some level, at one point I might have considered, my political allies, I don't trust them to tell the truth. So I tried to base my conclusions of the book mostly on things I personally witnessed, that I could vouch for and just say, having seen the things I saw, this is what I feel I can say is true. And I found a lot of these people to be idiots. Like, I found that there was a plan to get into the building, but it was just step one, storm the Capitol. Step two, America is saved. And I talked to them as they were leaving. And there was this sense of euphoria. There was a sense of, yeah, we did it. So I do think that there was some level of foresight and some level of planning. So I understand calling that a putsch. I get it.
Oh.
But they were a lot of, at least, it's possible that there was really I couldn't find anyone with a plan. It's possible that no such person existed. It's possible this was just a bunch of idiots feeding off of each other on the internet, saying that this sounded cool, and another bunch of idiots in Trump's circle of power saying, hey, we can use this to our advantage.
With respect.
Uh-huh.
John Eastman and others ferment this idea that if Pence will stop the vote, if they can, or you can now stop Pence, and they knew it, and that was really, if there was a war aim on that day, it was to stop the count, and it wasn't just running willy-nilly, helter-skelter through and sitting in Nancy Pelosi's desk. There was a war aim. The war aim, and they were successful until the evening, but they wanted to stop the vote because Donald Trump had attempted all these other illegal, and including the talk radio lies and the rest of this stuff. That was a crescendo moment. That was their shot, and it failed.
Let me respond to a couple of things here. First, you mentioned Pence a couple of times. From my firsthand experience, when Trump gave his speech, he said something vague. He said, Pence, I hope you do the right thing. I'm hearing bad things.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It was Trump made it clear he wanted Pence to do something. He was deliberately unclear, at least in his public statements, but there was a thing he was calling on him to do. And then after the speech ended, as I was marching with people down the streets, before I realized anything else was going on, I did hear a call going out as people were checking their phones saying, Pence betrayed us.
Yeah,
there was
absolutely.
a definite shift in the energy of the crowd. And the fact that they felt that Pence had betrayed them, and that, coincidentally, Pence was already in the building that they were walking towards, I do think was one of the things that got people more riled up.
They had begun to count. I
Yeah.
mean, this box that predates the American Revolution or dates to the American Revolution, it's an artifact. They wanted to get their hands on it.
Right. And so that was the thing. I do think that, Trump had some sort of plan. Again, from my vantage point, what I was able to see myself is watching the people do it. I don't think the plan all along was to break into the building in order to overthrow democracy. I
Mm.
think, and I don't think, I think it was very vague to people what the plan was. I think they're, and I talk to a lot of people, people are always talking about Q. We call it
Yeah.
QAnon forums, but you talk to any of them and they'll be like, QAnon? What's that? I've never heard of such a, they're very good at giving that line, but they refer to Q as an individual. And that was just one of many popular things nowadays. It's almost like it's just a form of entertainment. People who will throw out these, conspiracy theories and just because that
Well,
gets clicks,
Q's,
that gets shared.
yeah, Q's
So
not broadcasting anymore, but now it's R, next letter,
okay.
and so they listen to occasionally R. It's R comes up, but
Well, so
no,
I think there were people like that who were pushing this
yes,
idea that hey, line up, just
yes,
put your hands on each other's shoulders and push your way into the building. I
yes.
think that got shared and that was very popular on the internet, so people were familiar with that. I have not personally seen evidence that Trump or his group of people had wanted that to happen. My general read is that Trump and his group of people wanted a big angry mob outside the building to give them more pressure to pull off the legal maneuverings they were hoping to pull off inside the building. If I
You know,
had to guess,
you know,
I would say something like that.
I think there was a cadre. I think there were even more true believers, and they were going to stop the vote, and that was their war aim on that day. Now there might have been all kinds of useful idiots that
Mm-hmm.
were all milling around and ready to go, but my belief is they were going to stop that vote, and Donald Trump was going to get votes, or there were going to be re-elections or attempted re-elections in these different states, Arizona being one of them. I think Wisconsin's, the list. And that way they were going to, like organized crime, they're going to sort of run their own boys in. A very precarious moment. It can't be ever discounted that what they attempted to do, and I've talked about this on the radio show,
Mm-hmm.
since the time that Washington hands the reins of power to John Adams and the crown heads of Europe, the Romanovs, Bourbons, and others, and they see that nobody died, nobody was murdered,
Mm-hmm.
the church didn't make a decision, the military didn't overthrow anybody, they simply had a transfer of power. We've done that traditionally up until this man. And
Well,
he, and
Lincoln,
he,
but
well, even then with Lincoln, it caused a civil war,
right.
but it wasn't this insanity that you and I have just witnessed, where
I hear what you're saying. Like
yeah,
even Lincoln, the people who ended up leaving the Union, they admitted that he won the election. Um,
oh,
and you know what? Actually, I often say one of my little history
oh,
tidbits is I think it was John Adams losing that really solidified our status as a
yeah,
stable democratic republic
yeah,
because Washington he decided to leave. He could have
step
stayed.
down. That's
Yeah,
right.
he
That's right.
retired,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
nice that he handed over power. But
yeah.
John Adams wanted to stay president. He lost the election, and he accepted that he lost. And a
Very good.
lot of countries never get to that point. For example, like Russia. Russia
Oh,
looked like maybe it was a democracy for a little while in the '90s. Like at the time you were watching,
uh,
Boris Yeltsin. It looked like maybe it was going to catch on. But then Putin got into power, and he just never left. There was
lockdown.
never right.
Yeah,
So, like, you have to get to the point where you have someone who admits gracefully that they lost in order for you to be a stable democratic republic. And I think John Adams deserves credit for that.
you're right. You're
Um,
absolutely right. That's well said.
but
The point of it, but this transition that comes from the time of Adams
right.
and until Trump, and he's the first one to illegally try to stop it, and that's an unforgivable sin. It can never be made right, at least in my mind.
The thing that I always keep coming back to is like I see my mission is history. My first allegiance is to the record. And accuracy matters to me. Accuracy matters most. So I go back again to like the things that were said about January 6th by the media that would seem to be lying in the right direction. I think Matt Taibbi calls it that. Another example was like the famous viral picture I reprinted in my book of the guy who had the zip ties. And there was this story going for a while that he brought the zip ties with him, and that was proof of a plot to kidnap the members of Congress. And it wasn't true. Like, even the people prosecuting that guy admit that he found them when he was inside. The police dropped them, and he just picked them up and took them with him. Now, as I also say in the book, I hope it's obvious that breaking into the Capitol building and finding zip ties inside is still a crime. Like, these people are criminals. Like, I want them to be, all of them to be punished. I absolutely hope all the criminals are caught. Like, I personally interviewed a ton of people who were bragging about breaking into the Capitol building while Congress is in session and punching police officers. That's a crime. I'm not on these people's side. I want them to go to jail. But I do want to be very, very careful to make sure that I don't ever say anything that I'm not sure I can back up and prove. And so I just build a little step at a time.
How many of these people are now imprisoned?
You sound like you would know better than me.
I don't know. I mean, there's a significant number of men and women who were there that day who are now incarcerated, and the trials go on.
Right.
But they weren't. Those were not rigged trials.
Absolutely.
They were convicted for what they did.
Right, but I think
on that day.
Right, but I do think that, and this is, who I really idolize in many ways, just in terms of format, is Joe Rogan, because he's just got a guy to Google everything. Like, hey, Jamie, look this up whenever there's anything he's unsure of. So if I had Jamie here, I'd say look this up. But I think most of those were not like insurrection charges. Most of those were, breaking and entering, punching police officers. Yeah, I think a lot of them went to jail for a couple of years, and now they're out. Yeah. The most famous one, the QAnon shaman, who I did talk to very briefly myself. That's, I got a short little clip of me talking to him that's on my website. I think he did a couple of years, and he's out. And I think
is he out yet? Did they get is he out now?
I think I heard that he's got his own podcast now. Last I heard, but I don't want to claim to be an expert on that one. But so I think one of the points I want to stress that I do think the people who are a team not Trump often gloss over is that the people who actually broke into the building, they believed democracy had been overthrown by the Democrats. They believed the election had been stolen because Donald Trump told them that, and they believed him. So in a lot of their minds, they were trying to save democracy. Now, again, obviously that's still a crime, but I do think it's important to have an accurate view of the narrative.
I'll leave you with this, and then you give final comment, and I know we're scheduled to talk again. It wasn't just Donald Trump told me so. It was a series of people that were placed in and around Trump. And then the next level was AM talk radio. Then the next level was the Alex Jones people and social media. And those were the people. And they fermented this. Ben, this wasn't something that just happened because, and although I do believe, the prime mover is Donald Trump, John Eastman, I give you a handful of people. They got this thing off the ground. But you were talking in the beginning of watching civilization die. What the role that radio played in this, AM radio played in this, the role that the social media played in this, certain outlets played in it, and more importantly, and they paid the price that Fox News paid. So when it's said and done, and it may never be, perhaps in my lifetime, but when it's said and done, there were a hell of a lot of people involved in this and what they were aiming eventually to do. Last comment.
Okay. I think at this point, the best thing I can say that fits this conversation is very near the end of the book, what I identify as, I think, the the biggest thing that I feel you can very clearly prove with the available evidence is that Trump could have called off the mob at any time. Like, it's very difficult to prove that this was an insurrection that he'd planned 5 steps in advance, especially because it didn't really do him any good. Like, it's hard to say that, but you can say that there was clearly, if nothing else, a level of negligence, getting a giant angry mob of people together and telling them to walk down the street with no supervision. Side note, Alex Jones was supposed to lead the mob. He was the guy whose job was to lead it, but they left without him, so there was no one leading it. And so horribly planned. And then once they got inside, Trump wants credit for tweeting a couple of times that he said stay peaceful. Okay, let's grant for the historical record he did do that. But he also didn't tell them to stop. Like, if after a couple of hours,
his daughter comes in and says and talks to him or asks him to stop it. He's all by himself watching television. He won't do it.
Right. There's a couple of reports from members of Congress that saying that they heard phone calls with him, maybe overheard phone calls with another member of Congress, where he's kind of taunting them, kind of saying, well, I guess these people just take it more seriously than you, like they're begging him to call them off, and he doesn't. And then when he does call them off, they do. That was a huge turning point in that day. Because it wasn't just people inside the building. There were thousands of people outside the building, and it looked like maybe they might enter. That was a huge force.
What time of the day was that? I mean, it was evening or getting into evening when they called, when Trump makes that call.
Yes.
No.
And so I just think, like, he knew he could have called it off, and he chose not to. He chose instead to negotiate and try to use what was happening to his advantage to get more concessions. And, like, surely that's a crime, right?
Yes.
like so I'd say, like, charge him with that. I feel like that's one of the easiest ones to prove.
He's facing, I don't know how many different counts of his activities. And the big one, I called it a RICO, which kind of is a RICO, and that he'll be there tomorrow. You and I will do this again. I really enjoyed talking to you. You're a special guy. We stormed the Capitol, and I think Ben's going to do some radio with us. All right, so I asked you to leave us with something, and I interrupted you. Leave us with. Is there a, as a historian, is there a lesson here?
I almost read the conclusion of my book there, but I know you're trying to wrap up, so maybe I'll save it. But first, if you'll forgive me, is it all right if I just plug my stuff? Try to remember to be a good businessman.
Please.
So I am the Chasing History Project. Website is chasinghistoryproject.com. You can go there and sign up for the email list. I'm on most social media. It's just sort of, at the moment, I'm just set up so I can hopefully get followers and put out more things later. So Instagram, Twitter, I'm on Substack. People can follow me there, and you can purchase the book on Amazon or at any bookstore. It will be in the register. You'd have to order it. It's not popular enough to be on the shelves yet. But so it's sorry, guys, we stormed the Capitol. The lesson, I think, for history, there's a couple of things, but my main lesson is never bet on genius what stupid explains just as well. Yeah. Like, there's nefarious actors, there's people trying to do bad things. I'm not saying they're not, but I don't think what we're seeing is anyone's grand plan. I think this is a lot of plans that didn't work, that are just kind of spinning together, because a lot of these people are very powerful but not very smart. So, I mean, the lesson I give to people is that you kind of have to save yourself. If you live in dark times, you have to seek wisdom yourself, seek knowledge yourself, and understand, to have a certain amount of skepticism. Like, don't blindly trust Q or Trump or CNN or any one voice. You have to have the process that I would teach my history students, the process of analyzing your sources and trying to weigh how much weight to apply to it, how biased it is, how accurate it is. And there's that process of thinking logically rather than just listening to a narrative and running with it. is lost. I think everyone worships political narratives now. Everything they hear, they try to fit into the story they already decided they think is true. And I think that, more than anything else, is killing us. So that's my lesson.
We'll do it again. You're a great guest, and thanks for coming on. We stormed the Capitol. Ben Hamilton. I'll talk to you again, Ben. Thanks for doing the show.
Thank you very much.
See you guys. All right. Ben. And again, so to thank Mark Crowley and Kelly Michaels and Brian Taylor and everybody else, thank you guys. The shoot was there. We're coming to a head. This is all this nonsense that we've been watching for almost 3 years, 2.5 years. It's coming to a head in Georgia tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching. See you the next time on the shoot down the hallway at 9 o'clock Saturday morning. I'll see you there. Thank you.